desirable requirements, that should be a tool function or a capability that provides a benefit that would not exclude a tool from your consideration if it were absent. So an example I've provided here is, does a report have a graphical representation or a sorted data view? Now, you get the same information out of either one of those, so that could be a desirable requirement, unless, of course, there's a huge corporate benefit and cost saving to having a graphical representation. Then you might move that as a mandatory requirement. But think clearly about which things are actually nice to have, and you can make a portion of those a requirement to meet in a request for proposal or a request for tender. But again, the word of advice is to be realistic about how, not doing an overkill in this area. The next thing in terms of establishing requirements is to understand exactly where each of those requirements fits into your process and fits into your workflow. One of the things I do a lot with clients is walk through the way each process works and document the flow. And you may already have existing workflow documentation in your organization, and that's a good place to start. Take each step and list the tool functions that can automate or support that part of the process or that part of the workflow. In doing that, you're actually building a workflow map around requirements. And sometimes you'll come across a requirement that you actually hadn't thought of, but that is absolutely essential to help automate and integrate the workflow with respect to the service management processes that you're using. Once you've done that, then go back to your definitions of what is mandatory and what's desirable and start mapping each of those requirements into one of those categories, mandatory or desirable. List, as you're going through the workflow, list all the points of integration where you hit on a workflow where there's a functional requirement and a performance requirement associated to that, but it hands off into another process area. Make sure that you document where those handoffs and those triggers are, because there will be additional functional requirements there for not only integration, but that can help you start to establish the workflow map for the next process. So think about it as a life cycle flow and start to develop your requirements based on how the workflow actually works within your organization. Another checkpoint is to make sure that each service life cycle stage is covered, so that you're not forgetting things. So when it comes time for looking at integration points and handoff points, try to document which part of the life cycle you're handing off to, which one you've just documented, and which is the next trigger point. And make sure that all of those are covered. And that way you have a set of requirements at the end of the day that really do cover off a service life cycle view, and that will help you get the robust tool that you need for today and going forward in the future. So the next part along building requirements is to actually document that in a list. And some pointers around doing that are to classify your requirements according to the priority of need. So even within a set of mandatory requirements, for example, you should still prioritize those and put in an appropriate weighting against those, so that when it comes time to evaluate the vendor's solution, you have a really clear sense of priority about what really is important. Very often times at the evaluation stage, an organization will come across a mandatory requirement that they absolutely thought throughout the whole process to date was mandatory, but actually through prioritization they see that perhaps maybe it isn't, and it may actually be desirable. And that's a double check that you've actually set your priorities straight, that the things you really consider to be hard, fast, mandatory requirements actually are. So classify those requirements by priority of need, give them an appropriate weighting that you can use as a helpful tool through the evaluation process for tools. Organize the requirements by process area. So you start to develop that life cycle flow, and that helps you to check that you've covered off all the areas that you're looking to automate in your solution. So keeping the requirements list itself organized by process area, by priority, and by weight is a really good way to make sure you've covered all the areas off. Then you can categorize those requirements to fit your needs intuitively within each process area. And there's a kind of a checkpoint here to say make sure that you're not only documenting just the functional requirements or how something executes a workflow, but that you're also looking at the performance requirements. How easy is it to do that? How many steps does it take? How fast is it? One of the areas that gets forgotten a lot is performance functionality in a tool as well. And you think you have a perfect set of requirements and you've acquired the right tool, but it doesn't perform the way you expect, or it's not easy to use. So performance requirements are as important as functional requirements are. And I've listed some examples in terms of structuring and categorizing within each process area, some intuitive ways to look at documenting requirements. So you might have accessibility requirements, security requirements, user-defined or system-generated requirements, the execution of a particular workflow. You look at an incident as an example, so detecting, logging, filtering, transferring, escalating, tracking, and so on, and then reporting and archiving. This is not intended to be an all-inclusive list, but it's just to kind of prompt you to give some thinking to a logical flow for how you're grouping your requirements together within a particular process area, and that helps you make sure that you've got a very complete and robust list. Now, I mentioned performance requirements, and one of the ways to help define what those are is to establish some test case scenarios. So, in other words, as you're documenting the requirements, think about, we'll use incident as an example. Now, how would I want a vendor to demonstrate to me how this workflow, how this tool meets this workflow execution of detecting, logging, filtering, transferring, etc. So jot down a test case scenario, use some real live examples in the organization, and establish a few of these that you'll want a shortlisted vendor to actually demonstrate within the tool. And remember to document in the case scenario both performance and functionality so that you can see how it works, but you can see how easy it works and what that flow actually looks like. So test cases are something that's a very useful tool when you're establishing requirements and right through into the evaluation process for narrowing down what is a good fit. A tool might meet the functional requirements, but its ease of use in certain areas might not be what you're looking for or might not meet your requirements. So test case scenarios are a really good way of refining that and making sure that you can meet those requirements and that you're covering off all of your bases and you have a full set of requirements. So that's a little bit about documenting requirements. Now, there are some, within our industry, there are some really good templates available. The ITIL guidance in the service design book has devotes a bit of real estate in the book, actually, to developing requirements and requirements engineering. So look out into the industry for some of these examples, and I'm sure you can save yourself some time by looking at some very successful examples of requirement documentation. So the lists that I've had on the past few slides are not all inclusive, but they're a really, really good start to the thought process and the actual activities of documenting requirements. Now you can go off and find some examples that will really fit well into that, and you'll be well on your way to having established a good fulsome set of requirements. So now I just want to move on a little bit and talk about some of the pitfalls that people fall into. They've gone through this logical thinking process. They believe they've gotten their requirements down pat, and they're about to go out and look into the market for tools. Here are some common mistakes that people make. The first one is that many people believe that complex and comprehensive are synonymous. When it comes to tools, an overly complex tool is not necessarily what you need, nor does it mean that something less than that isn't comprehensive enough to fit your needs. What the trick here is really is to have an educated balance between what is the best fit for your organization and what is overkill. Now, this relates directly to requirements because you can over-engineer your requirements, and I think I've mentioned that we need to try and consciously avoid doing that. So make sure that the tools you're looking at, don't necessarily gravitate just to the ones that are extremely complex, because that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to fit your need any better than one that's less complex. Look for the educated balance. And this is a classic one, the next one. You have unique requirements. I have worked with hundreds of organizations to acquire ITSM tools. And in every single one of those cases, every one of these organizations felt that they had unique requirements that no one else did. So they developed, or they tried to develop, requirements based on that. Well, that's actually not the case. Most companies have the same kinds of core requirements. So look out into the industry to define what those are, and try to avoid the temptation of heavily customizing or configuring your requirements so that only a tool that needs to be heavily customized can fit the need. That is extremely expensive, and it's not wise advice. There are so many great tools available in the market today that come out of the box. Now, 10 years ago, out of the box was really a misnomer, and most tools did need some kind of customization just to execute the basic process flow from end to end. But today that's different. The industry is much more mature. There are some excellent tools on the market that you can buy virtually out of the box. So stop thinking that your needs are unique. I have not, in any of my 25 years of doing this, found an organization that was that unique that they required a high level of customization. They just thought they did at the beginning. The next one, ram and refine. We also have a tendency, as I think within the IT industry, to look at tools as solutions to problems. And while at a very high level, that's probably an accurate statement, we tend to take it too far, and we try to use tools to correct non-technical problems. When it comes to implementing service management, one of the implementation strategies that many companies will use with respect to implementing processes is to try and address some points of pain, which gives them some quick wins in the organization. It builds a good cultural adoption for changing the way of working. Results are seen quickly, and it overall helps to start that process of building a customer service-focused culture in the organization. What this is not true of, however, are tools. One of the common mistakes is to try to acquire a technical solution to address a cultural problem. So try and avoid at all costs what I call ram and refine for quick wins. Don't be thinking about tools as a short-term band-aid for a problem in the organization. Tools are meant to support and execute and automate well-functioning processes. So don't try and use tools to correct non-technical problems. And you'd be surprised at the number of organizations who've tried this, and you won't be surprised to know that most of them are not successful. And there's a lot of money wasted in the process. Another misconception in the industry is that upgrading is cheaper than replacing tools. That's something we instinctively think is the case. I mean, how could it not be? Adding something on to an existing investment must be cheaper than replacing the tool, right? Well, that's actually not the case, and hidden upgrade costs can surprise you. The white paper that accompanies this webcast has more detailed information about what some of those hidden costs are and how to look at calculating the true return on investment either for an upgrade option or a replacement option. And you might be surprised at the costs there. So don't automatically assume that upgrading is the route to go